That's kind of where we are. And yeah, so this division is Pacific West, and that is Dallas Fuel, Gladiators, Valiant, San Francisco Shock, and the Vancouver Titans. So a lot of really interesting teams actually. When it gets down to it, lots of new interesting players coming in, a lot of super talented players coming in from contenders that um, people have been looking for a long time. You know, lots of really exciting people coming in, a lot of really excited kind of combinations that we haven't seen before, a lot of really strong returning players, a lot of talented teams from last year that are just kind of retooled and gotten better, actually. So I think it's actually super interesting. First of all, look at the Dallas Fuel. So, of kind of looking at Dallas last year, I believe they ended up, what was it, third or fourth in the playoffs? Yeah, so third. Lost to the lost to the Atlanta Rain in the losers grand finals, basically, losers finals, whatever. Right? Did really, really well throughout the entire year, actually. I believe they won a tournament, didn't they? Yeah, it says they won the May Melee. Right, so they've won one. They've been to every single tournament, I believe. They did fantastic. They didn't make countdown, right? Yeah, they didn't make countdown, but performed really, really well throughout the year, right? In lieu of, XE, who they lost their hit scan midway through the year, he had to retire or kind of take a break due to some medical things, unfortunately. But without a hit scan, like a hard, hard hit scan player, they're able to kind of make it work and really improved upon what was, like what was like this kind of interesting combination of these Paris players who were super talented, and then Fearless, who's one of the best main tanks in the world, combining them alongside some other additions made this one of the strongest teams in the league, as well as the addition of Rush, right? And then they had an extremely successful year, and going into this year, they have, let me pull up my notes real quick. So overall, like extremely strong performance last year. They led NA for a majority of the year, and were kind of like leading up all the way till the end until the Glads pulled it up, and then Atlanta started doing really well in the playoffs. They're kind of looking to build on the success going into next year. So some notable changes: they lost Xe, they lost Jexe, they lost Pine, lost Repel. Right, all of them went to either retirement or unsigned, or I don't really know about any of these players. I don't know what any of them are doing. I'm going to be honest, except Repel's confirmed retired. Right? I don't really know about the others. But with that loss, they added Gurio, they added Edison, they added Chio, and they added Rascal as a coach. So, pretty interesting additions. Some pretty talented players coming in, some kind of questionable ones, and we'll talk about that. So, first and foremost, let's talk about some strengths going with this team. Probably the biggest strength of this team is their tank line. Fearless and Hanbin is up there with Fate and Void, up there with what used to be Super and Choi, right? As one of the best, most versatile tank lines in the league. Let's first look at Hanbin, right? Hanbin is a top two diva in the world. He is a top 1-2 Sigma in the world, right? Zarya is very, very strong. I don't know as much about his Roadhog, but it's not super important. Either way, extremely good off tank, right? Super high level of play at that in that role, and he's been that way the whole time. The numbers show it. He's statistically an anomaly, right? Super talented player. Rarely makes mistakes that are, super consequential. He's just such a an impactful rock for this team, and having him come back and having him kind of be able to play that role again, super super important. And then you look at Fearless, like when you talk when you look at the tank line and you recognize that like you talk about Fearless second, that's kind of insane, recognizing the kind of talent that the other player has. But Fearless, best Winston in the world, really really solid Reinhardt, really solid Orisa. Wrecking Ball is not that bad, but could use some work. Roadhog probably not his best, but still he has a lot of those main tanks down, and his Winston is god tier, right? Definitely up there with players like Gushria, like Gaga, like Fate, right? Probably better than all of them actually. He is just a menace. He's so so good on that character, right? He can do literally anything he wants, and kind of having these two as that kind of core. I know it's going to be single tank, right? But having these two as a core gives you the ability to play literally anything you want, right? And if Fearless's ball isn't up to snuff, then Hanbin can probably pick it up, right? I'm sure he can pick it up to a certain level, or if they can't, they can lean towards more towards like Zarya Diva comps instead of like a Wrecking Ball, right? So, I mean, that having that tank line is fucking insane for this team, and that's super exciting. Another massive strength for them is this kind of returning DPS line that they have, Sparkle and Doha, right? Um, so there was a really, really big question coming into the next year. Sure, there was about like the hit scan, but going into the year, massive questions around who's going to be the Tracer player for this team. Everyone knows Tracer is extremely impactful, extremely important, and everyone was like, "Oh, is it going to be Sparkle? Is it going to be Doha? Is it going to be Xe?" People thought it was going to be Xe for a little bit because he was playing it, but then he retired and Sparkle picked it up. And Sparkle did a fantastic job filling in that role. He wasn't the best tracer in the world. He wasn't probably top five or anything like that, but he was very, very good. He was a very, very solid tracer. He filled his role well, and he did a really, really good job for this team. Let Doha play Sombra, and those two together were able to, play around and, you know, well, trying to think of the best way to put it. Sparkle did a very good job doing his job, right? It Playing Tracer in the Overwatch League is probably one of the hardest things you can do in video games professionally, and Sparkle was able to fill in that role and learn it very, very fast. It's an extremely hard role to play, and going from someone who just didn't have a Tracer in his kit to now having a very like a top seven, top eight Tracer in the league, that's insane progress, right? That's something you don't see. You don't see that, right? Um, so I'm super excited to see him kind of improve on that. Hopefully he can. And then Doha, very, very solid Sombra, right? He's got some flexibility around. He's got a pretty good May. He's got a pretty good what's it called? Farah. But I mean Sparkle plays a lot of that. But either way, Doha is a pretty talented player and definitely known for his Sombra. He can fill that role really well. And then him and Sparkle can definitely lean more towards that flex DPS role now, rather than what they used to be doing, where it's kind of splitting Tracer, Sombra, right? Now Sparkle can lean more into his carry heroes, right? His Genji, his Pharah, his Echo. Probably Tracer again. Doha can lean into that Sombra, maybe some other pocket picks, probably Hanzo too. And in addition to that, I think a very, very strong addition for them was Edison. Edison is me and some of my friends joke about it all the time, where Edison is this kind of player that you just kind of forget exists. You forget he's in the league a lot of the time. And bringing him in provides Dallas with the ability to be like, hey, if we want to play a long range hit scan, right? We want to play like an Ash, we want to play a Widow. We have someone who can do that to a certain level, right? I don't think Edison's competing with some of the best hit scans in the world, but he's good. He also got a Tracer under his belt, so he can do that as well. But it provides them with at least some level of competence on that kind of role. And kind of to counter that, they also have Gurio, who, while Gurio doesn't have the pedigree that someone like Edison has, he has a ton of potential. He's a super mechanically talented player. Um, he played for, I believe it was Team Diamond, right? Yeah, Team Diamond, who was like GC Busan, or I think I forgot what their technical name was. GC Busan TDI. Yeah. So played for them. He was pretty talented, though kind of iffy, especially on his tracer. His tracer wasn't really that great, but his long range hit scans were pretty good. And having these two hit scans allows them to play off each other, allows them to switch out in and out depending on who's good at the time, who's good at specific heroes, lets them focus on like Cass or focus on Widow, right? Those kind of things. Focus on Ash, lets them do that. Edison provides a little bit of flexibility. They've got a very, very good DPS line, I think. Um, One that'll let them do, basically anything they'll want to. Um, Gives them flexibility to cover basically any hero they want. They also have Sparkle for Doom on tank, I guess. They really want to do that. And then looking at their backline, Fielder is a very, very strong flex support, right? I think his Moira and his Bap are probably his best. Though he is pretty good at Ana. Um, Not the best, but his Ana and his Zen do they do the job right through it. I don't think he's meant to be their star player. They've got a lot of other stars everywhere. They don't need someone who's, they need someone who's going to do their job. And I think Fielder does fit that really, really well. And he's got a lot of potential to make plays on characters like Bap. Um, so having him come back and again, this like very, very strong core of Dallas should look to kind of push this team hopefully into the championship competing, further from just championship competing to winning, right? Push them to the level of Shanghai, right? Um, and I think there's like a very, very high floor in a lot of this roster, and that'll give them a very, very high base level of performance. Um, Another strength that I don't think is talked about as much is coaching for this team. I know Rascal just joined, so we don't really know as much about him, but It was just before I believe it was just Russian aid, and it's really hard to judge how coaching works in the back room without being in the team, right? A lot of people like to make assumptions about how teams work and how like who coaches how in what ways. That's just not a very easy game to play. You really just got to go off of things you see, and there's very few things that show how good a coach is outside of how they deal with difficult situations and kind of unexpected situations. So you look at the beginning of the year that we talked about earlier with Dallas when they lost their main hit scan. They lose Exy, and they've got to play a whole year without an Ash player, right? Ash was super strong throughout the entire year. Um, even though it's after her one shot nerf, right? She couldn't get one shot with Mercy anymore. Ash was still super impactful. Bob's super impactful still, and Ash has played a ton throughout the entire year, right? And they don't have someone who can play that, so they lean more into their strengths. And not only do they lean into Doha Sombra, he's able to help Sparkle develop his Tracer and become a very, very high level Tracer player. And the way that they're able to shift and pivot their skills from like a ball meta into playing Winston into that, right? And leaning towards Winston, leaning towards Fearless's strength, and leaning towards Doha's strengths, and leaning towards their entire team's strengths is insanely impressive to me. And I guess that just, I don't know what to say other than that shows that Rush is able to adapt and Rush is able to lead this team through scenarios that are, you can't expect. And I think that's, I don't know, I think that's the highest praise you can give for a coach. And I think what he's done with this team has been kind of, he's been doing God's work basically. Um, and overall, I think for this team, there's not as many weaknesses. There's more kind of relative unknowns, if you know what I mean, right? There's a lot of things that are kind of iffy. And what I mean by that is you look at a few small holes in their tank line, right? You look at maybe Roadhog, maybe Wrecking Ball, maybe Orisa, right? Fearless has a really good Rhine, very, very fantastic, like just insanely good Winston. His Orisa's not bad, right? But his ball wasn't the best, and his Roadhog is not really the greatest. So if you get into a spot where those tanks are really good, what do they do there? I feel like they'll be able to do it between the two of Hanbin and Fearless. They won't need the kind of flexibility that you normally would. They'll be able to swap in and out and focus on one or the other and develop it. I think it's fine, but small question mark there. Sorry. Let me pull up the rest of my notes. There's also, um, when I look at it, I look at Chio as a kind of question mark because Jexay was a very solid Lucio. I view Jexay kind of in the same light as I view someone like Masa, who we'll get to later, where I believe Masa has a very, very strong Lucio. And I believe Jexay has a very, very strong Lucio, especially mechanically. Jexay's Lucio mechanics are very strong. It's flexibility that's an issue, right? Mercy, you don't really need to play at a super high level, right? There's not many players that are considered fantastic Mercies, so it's not that great of a concern. Brig and Bap are the big concerns, right? And Jexay wasn't really able to fill that role of playing Brig or playing Bap at the highest level and allow you to play Briggs and Bap or back Bap Baps and backlines or play Briggs and backlines really confidently, right? Jexay and Masa are both kind of liabilities when it comes to Brig, or not as much liabilities, or they're more they can't play the role to the level that someone like Alarm could, or like Lee Jae Gon can, right? Or like Skewed can, right? If you want to compete at the highest level, you need people who can compete at the highest level in every role. And in a role that's so consequential and as hard as Brig, when that's so dominant for the entire year, it's it's super harmful to not have that, right? Super harmful not to have a top tier Brig, um, especially because of how that enables your backline, how that enables your carries, whether it be your tracer, whether you're playing for your tracer or your second DPS, whether it be an Echo or like an Ash, right? Or if you're playing for your Zen, it's just hard without a really good Brig. So, yeah, the way I see it is that I think Chio's an upgrade um, on the Brig side of it. I'm not so sure about his Lucio, but I think he's upgraded on the Brig side. I think he's going to be a good fit for this team. The only question is whether he can compete at a higher level than Jexay. I think Jexay was definitely holding this team back. Pretty solid Lucio, but I think overall he was probably holding this team back. And I think Chio's going to be an upgrade, but can he compete at the highest level with people like later on you'll see Funny Astro and Skewed, right? Can he compete with them? Can he compete with Funny on Lucio? Can he compete with Skewed on Brig? I don't really know. I don't know. And then other question marks probably going to be their I would say Tracer. Not that Sparkle's bad. We talked about it. I think Sparkle's a good Tracer. I think he's very talented. I think he's gotten way better. The issue is that the entire league has gotten way better too, right? You look at the additions that have been made. Like Striker is back. Like Striker's back on a team. Proper joined a team. Yaki's on a team. There's Venom's on a team. There are so many good tracers throughout the league right now that you can't be just okay at tracer. So I'm hoping that Sparkle can push his tracer to the next level, or if not, Edison can, right? And they can push their tracer to the level where they can compete with the best in the league. I don't know if they can. That's why it's kind of a question mark. I hope he can. I love Sparkle. Sparkle's hilarious. I fucking love watching him every time. He's so good, and I hope he can compete with the other tracers like at this super high level. But we don't know until we see it. I'm rooting for him, and I think Dallas is going to be super exciting this next year, right? I am extremely excited to watch this team play. Sorry, just one second. But either way, next team, I'll pull this up. Los Angeles Gladiators. Sorry, I'm just. Okay, cool. Next team is Los Angeles Gladiators. So, sorry, let me pull up my stuff. So, after kind of what is it, 4 years at this point? 4 years of never really reaching what we think is their potential and never actually winning anything until the end. Glad's actually won a stage or won a tournament for once. They won the Countdown Cup, especially with like the iconic shoe play on Havana, right? Ended up winning the whole thing, and finally achieved some level of success on this team. But after all those years, after kind of middling performances, management decided to make some changes in the staff and across the roster. And looking at it, I think there are some insanely good changes made, especially on the roster side. But there are also a few questionable decisions, right? So yeah, I think it's a little bit questionable on some spots, but we'll talk about it. So changes were they lost Muse, they lost Mirror, they lost Birdring, they lost Moth, they lost Deepay, head coach, and they lost Tydala, who was assistant coach. And they added in Reiner, formerly Frill and Shapeshifter. Um, they added Ons, they added Funny Astro, they added Patty Fan, they added Unter and Smash, who are both coaches. So Unter and Smash are coaches. Um, so now the roster looks like tank line of Reiner Space, DPS line of Kevster, Patty Fan, Ons, and support line of Shu, Skewed, Funny Astro. Jesus Christ, man. We'll talk about that support line in a second because that's insane. So, strengths. First and foremost, I think Kevster. Everyone knows Kevster is an insanely talented player. He played on, what was it, 130, 120 ping on his first season and performed out of his mind towards the end of the year. And then next year, he came in low ping, also a great player. Right? Really, really strong tracer. He's got a really strong echo too. He's really flexible in general. Plays a lot of the flex DPS, but he's also got the ability to play long range hit scans, play cast as well. And he's always been a player that has impressed despite being on a team that wasn't winning, right? Not as much not winning, but not winning big tournaments, right? He always performed kind of above the pedigree of the team he was playing on. So having someone like this who is extremely consistently high level is a very good baseline for building a championship level team. So I think Kev's just going to be a super, super important part of this team. Second strength, which I can't really overstate, has to be their support line. Holy, I'm going to say it right now. I think this is the best support line in the league. I think so. Between Shu, Skewed, Funny Astro, you have the best BAP in the world, most likely. One of the best Zens, one of the best Anas, best Brig in the world, probably best Lucio in the world, and Mercy is going to be covered. And I'm sure Shoes and Skewed can cover Moira in there, right? I think it's definitely the most flexible, and it's got the highest floor across every single hero. I think it's probably the best support line in the league, right? I mean, you look at Shanghai, and Shanghai has Izayaki Lijigan, which is very good, but I feel like between these three, you've got such a high level of play on their best heroes that it's hard to discount how good this is. Like, holy man. Finding Astro's Lucio is insane. His Mercy's also really good. His Brig's gotten way better. But they've also got Skewed, who is a very high level Zen, also probably the best Brig in the world, mechanically and decision making wise. Shu is a probably the best BAP in the world. Insanely strong Ana, insanely strong Zen, and has always performed at a super high level. He's kind of a linchpin of this team. Like oh, they're so good. I cannot understate it. I think this is probably the best part of this team um, overall, and yeah, best support line in the league. I can't say it enough. I think these guys are all so good, right? But with that in mind, there are a few question marks to work through on this team, right? Kind of the big question mark. It's not a negative per se. I don't think it's a negative. I would say a big question mark on this team, a big question is surrounding the tank line, right? I love Space and I love Reiner, right? I think they're both very good players. I think they're both talented on their own, right? But questions surrounding Reiner first. Let's talk about him. Reiner's coming off of fantastic year with Tier 2 Drama Alert slash American Tornado slash. He was on Bobby Wasabi too, right? No, that was Hydration. But on those teams, he was on Redbirds. Yeah, so I forgot. But performing extremely well, winning a ton of NA contenders, kind of dominating it, right? Clearly the best NA main tank that isn't super, right? Probably the best ball and probably the best North American ball. Probably, but yeah, better ball than super. Pretty close on Rhine, right? In my opinion, but there's a question as to whether or not he can translate that to the Overwatch League. I do. I think he can. This is not me discounting him. I think he's going to be fantastic. I think he's going to be a very, very good main tank. And I think he's kind of a step up from what a lot of other teams have been signing on main tank. But there's always the kind of question of whether it translates. I think he will. I think him, OG, UV, and then speedily, hopefully, when he gets old enough, right, will translate very well into League. I think they're all extremely talented, and I'm super excited for it. There's just kind of a, main tank is a little bit, it's one of those roles that doesn't translate super well sometimes. So hopefully he gets developed really well and he can kind of perform at such a high level and like the level that I think he can. Um, Other question, Space. A lot of people like Space. A lot of people like Space a lot, right? A lot of people think he's one of the best tanks in the league. Um, I don't consider Space to be an S tier tank. I consider him to be in the A tier. You know, I don't think he's as good as Void or Hanbin. I don't think he's at the level that Choi was, right? Especially on Diva. And then you get down to the level after that, and it's like, okay, like what players are we talking about at this point, right? If I go back to look at the rest of the league, like obviously we said Void, we said Hanbin, right? And then past that, there's like Hawk. I think he's around like maybe pushing around Hawk, probably more flexible, right? Probably a little bit better than Piggy, but he's kind of in this range where he's close. He's close to being one of the best, right? He's close, really, really close. But I don't know if I could take a team, and I don't know if I'm building a championship winning team, especially a Western one, and I'm like, yes, Space is the best off tank that I could have. Probably the best available. I think he gives you a very, very good floor performance. I think his Zarya is really good. I think his Sigma is really good. His Diva leaves a little bit, but he's a very individually talented player. I just don't view him as the top tier tank, right? But I think he's one of the best in North America, especially competing here. Like there's no void, but he's going to be competing with people like Fearless. He's going to be competing with Super. He's going to be competing with Hanbin, right? Mm, that's just it's. I'm wondering whether Space can step it up and kind of return to that World Cup winning form, that form where Space takes over lobbies. Um, I just don't think he's at that point. He hasn't been at that point in a little bit. So always been good. He always gives you a certain level of performance, but can he be like a championship tank? I don't really know. I got pinged. Sorry. Sorry, I need to check this. Okay, cool. But yeah, I don't really know. I do. I like him a lot. I think he's a really good personality. I think he's a really good leader for this team. Or from what I've heard, again, I can't say that I know because I'm not gonna, I haven't been in the team. But whether he can perform at the highest level of diva, right? And bring up his diva to the level of his sigma, bring up his Zarya to that level too. I hope, but you know, it's kind of like A tier. Does he push up to like that higher tier? I don't really know. And then the biggest question on this team is probably that second DPS spot. So Kevster, we already talked about. Kevster is a great player, super talented on his own. Um, I think you know, he's going to cover a lot of your bases, especially on flex DPS. Then you add Ons and Patty Fan. So first off, Ons. Ons in 2020 had one of the greatest seasons of all time on any hero, any role ever. Ons was a nutcase on Widow, especially on Ashe too, right? He was performing it. Also Sombra too. It was really his Sombra is super underrated, but we haven't seen a performance like that since. I mean, like we haven't seen a performance like that. That kind of carry potential. I can't really think of many like it. Maybe Lip in the playoffs or like Prophet season one playoffs. Just Ons all of 2020 or the end of 2020 was so good. It's just hard to understate that, right? And but 2021 kind of fell off. He was definitely good. He provided a certain level, but a certain level of impact, certain level of consistency, but he wasn't at the level that you'd expect from the name Hans, right? You weren't getting that always. You weren't getting that situation where you're always up one because he's always killed someone first, right? You weren't getting that, and I question whether or not he can return to that, right? Again, I don't want to pray on anyone's downfall or anything like that, but I can hope and pray that Ons is going to be as good of a pure hit scan. I can only hope that he's going to be that good, right? I really, really do, because he's so good when he's at his best. He's so individually talented that I really hope he can fill that second spot consistently. And then, other than that, there's Patty Fan. Patty Fan kind of burst onto the scene, and I believe was it the 2019 World Cup? Was that what it was? It was 2019 Gauntlet. And it was 2018 World Cup. Okay, got my years mixed up a little bit. But 2019, he was on Talon. He played Doomfist for them. He also played Widow. Got a really weird hero pool, Patty Fan does, but dude was a freak. Mechanical menace, right? He deadlifted teams on his own. He's really, really talented. He was really, really talented, but then retired, didn't play for a little bit, went to Valorant, and then came back, and now he's on the Glads. He showed tons of great talent in 2019, 2018, but that was what, 4 years ago? Like 3, 4 years ago? Like that's just so much time away from the game and playing at the highest level that it's hard to see Patty Fan being a mm, being a player that can provide and you know be a super consistent piece for this team outside of later in the year, right? Later in the year, given some time, I'm sure he can develop and kind of get back used to the pace of the game. I hope he can, but you know, there's a little bit of a question mark around can Patty Fan play the level that we all expected him to? How long was that? Like, yeah, 3, 4 years ago? I don't know. That's hard. Um, So, I mean, but again, he was a great Doom Viz, great Doom, great Widow as well. He was definitely super exciting, but he was just too young. I believe now, yeah, now he's 18, he can play. But yeah, I'm super excited to see him in the league. I'm super excited. He was awesome. He's also hilarious. He's a really funny dude. So I'm excited to see him. But yeah, there's questions of whether he can translate what he did in contenders 3 years ago to what he can do now in the league. Um, so another question I have for this team is kind of their coaching staff. So I mean, we all know about the whole Deepay thing, where Deepay had to leave. Deepay got, I don't know, cut, kicked. He decided to leave. I don't really know. I'm not, I didn't keep track of it. It wasn't something that I needed to know, I felt, so I didn't really care. But they lose Deepay, who had been running this team for oh, 4 years, 5 years maybe, if you include like pre-Overwatch League. But like, there's so much time where he was in charge of so many things, and he finally got a success, and then he got kind of he left for whatever reason, right? And at that point, this team has been kind of in this environment, in this ecosystem where Deepay has been in control for so long that you wonder if it can adapt and if this team and this environment can adapt to having new coaches, right? Face was, I believe, an assistant coach to Deepe, and then now he became a head coach. He brought in Unter, who I've heard very, very good things about, but I wasn't in the team, obviously, so I can't say anything about him. And then Smash, who I don't know much about, if I'm going to be honest. He was, oh, O2 Blast player. Yeah. I don't know much about him, if I'm going to be honest. Um, so I can't speak much to him, or much to how he plays or anything like that. How he coaches. I mean, I don't know anything about him, but I'm just wondering whether this staff can like fill that leadership and kind of rebuild this system, kind of in a post DPay Glads era, right? Not saying that it was a good or a bad change. It's just that it's different and it's going to be different no matter what they say and what they do because DPay is not there anymore. How's it gonna go? We don't really know. But Glad's still super exciting. Best support line in the league, probably. Tons of talent, but few question marks around their tanks and second DPS. Then we look at the other side of LA, which is also the other side of the Pacific, the LA Valiant. So, um, last year was horrendous, absolutely atrocious. Seriously, one of the worst things I've ever seen last year, right? Just like they signed whoever they could, they got a full Chinese roster of players that no one knew about. The only ones who did okay was like Crystal was okay, and Milan did okay, but that was it. That's all that happened. And then they wiped the slate clean, and they signed this new roster where they signed Dia, Innovation, and Becky, and supports of Coldest and Linksa. No tank. So I don't, this is a really hard roster to talk about. I'm going to be honest, really, really hard. But we'll look at it how it is. They're competing in the West. I mean the East. So they're competing with like Seoul and Shanghai and all those teams. But look at strengths. I'd say strengths include Dia. I think Dia's a very solid tracer player. He's not top tier. He's out of the league for a little bit, but he was on Shanghai's Acad. He didn't really play when he was on Shanghai, but he played on CC for a little bit, and then CC went on hiatus, I believe, and he joined the Valiant afterwards. He's always been a very solid tracer, pretty solid hit scan overall, but he's never been like star talent, right? He's always been pretty good, but I don't think he's ever been like greatest, kind of up in that like S tier. He's always been like B-ish, that kind of area. Right? But having him at least provides you with a little bit of consistency where it's like, okay, we're gonna have someone like Dia who's gonna be able to do something for us at some point and provide, that little bit of consistency, right? Um, Also, kind of strength I'd say is I think Coldest was always kind of known as a very high potential Chinese flex support. He didn't get to play a ton when he was on the Spark because MCD was playing a lot more. They also swapped up rosters a ton, and Hangzhou Spark is its own mess, so I don't even get into that. But Coldest always had a lot of potential. Um, so maybe in this team, when he's going to be playing more, he's going to be able to kind of push past where he was before and get more acclimated to the league and push towards, like a higher level flex support um, kind of status. And then you look at Lengsa. Lengsa was on Chaser for a little bit. I believe he was on Chengdu and then Chaser. I think that's how it went. Yeah, Chengdu and then he got demoted to Chaser. Right. But he was on that team. He was always a pretty consistent main support, but just wasn't as good as people like Evil Tall or Nisha, who are both very, very good main supports. So I don't want to take away from Linksa. He was just kind of playing third fiddle to two very good main supports, right? So he just didn't have a spot on that team. Um, but now he's got his own team, and I think he provides a very, very good baseline of performance, like similar to what Dia does. Not a star player. He plays main support, not a super impactful role when it comes to like mechanical plays and kind of being a standout player. But Linksa does provide a very solid core, right, in this kind of mixed Chinese roster. I think that that's a really, really good addition for a team that needs to rebuild from having one of the worst seasons of all time, right? Another strength that I have listed is actually the coaching. Um, so yeah, obviously massive mess last year, and I feel like it's going to be really hard for it would be really hard for this team to be, you know, to sign anyone, you know. Like, who wants to join this team? Who wants to join this organization after what's happened? And they ended up picking up No Hill, who was dropped off CC after some time after CC went on hiatus, and brought in Huyo. I haven't talked to No Hill. I have friends and I know people who do, and they say he's a very smart, very cool guy. So I'm excited for him. I think he's going to do pretty well. But again, I'm going to say this about every coach. I don't know. I haven't been in a room with them. I haven't worked with them, so I can't really say much about that. But Williel's been in a lot of places. He was on London season one back then, right? He was, right? Yeah, he was. Yeah, he's been around everywhere. He's played so many. He's got a ton of experience. I'm sure he'll be able to provide a lot of guidance for this team, you know, and provide some kind of consistency in that staff and like a leadership presence, like a veteran presence. I think that's the right word I should use. Veteran. Veteran is what I should be saying, right? But Uyal does a very very good job playing that veteran role, right? Kind of like similar to Langsa, giving this like consistency, right? And then No Hill comes in as a very um, talented and kind of sought after coach who lost his spot on CC and he wasn't really big into Shanghai, so now he gets his own team. And I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do with this roster. They're in a really really tough spot um, coming off of that kind of season. I yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to look at this team and say like, yes, this team's going to perform. It's really hard to say like, yes, this team is going to compete with the best, or it's going to compete with the middle of the pack, right? It's hard to see Valiant as anything other than kind of a punching bag in the East, right? So you look at kind of weaknesses and kind of going into that, right? Obviously, no tank. They just don't have a tank. They don't have a tank player, right? They have 5 players, but you're supposed to have 6, so we don't know who the sixth is, and it's probably a tank, but we don't know who. Could be like Inhyuk from Team Diamond, but I don't know, man. I don't know who they're gonna sign. It's insane. I don't know. That's just it's so hard to judge this team without when they're missing a fucking player. You know what I mean? They don't have a tank. Um, Also, kind of big question is the second DPS. It's like we talked about Dia being like this kind of consistent level of play, right? But then you look at Becky and Innovation, right? Becky was on Team Diamond with Gurio. Um, the issue was that team played a lot of Brawl Double Shield, and I think Becky did pretty good on May, solid May player. His Echo is pretty good too, but the issue that comes up with this team and with that kind of player is they're in a spot where they're good, but how do they compete with the rest of the league, right? Becky's going to be going against Fleta, right? Against like Prophet, like Leave, Jinmu, right? How does Becky do that, right? Can he do that at this level? Same with Innovation. Innovation has performed pretty well on. He didn't play for Shanghai. No, 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 no. What am I saying? Team CC. He's playing for Shanghai's feeder team, playing on Team CC, but they haven't played in a little bit, right? They've been on hiatus for a little, but he was pretty good on this team, right? I remember, well, he played with who all. I forgot who all played on that, but either way, he was kind of playing second fiddle to, that proper Kilo Merit on O2 Blast, right? Same thing with Heesang on Talon and Auto, right? He was never pushing into that tier of contenders level. He was just kind of playing third, fourth, sixth, seventh fiddle to those like really, really talented players. And, it's hard to see like where is innovation, going to be beating out players like that. I think he beats out a lot of the old guard, right? A lot of older players in the league maybe, but with kind of the young blood coming in as well as the top tier talent, I think innovation just needs more time for that, right? And then Becky, relatively flexible, but he's going to be competing with Fleta, Prophet, Jinmu. That's a really tough ask, right? So, I think Dia's pretty solid. Innovation and Becky kind of scary to me, you know, whether they're going to be able to compete like with Overwatch League players and hold their own, right, and play at that level. And then these supports, I think Lynx is a pretty solid base. Can Coldest really push past, being mediocre, being like pretty solid on flex support? this team is a little scary. I I feel bad for Valiant fans and how they have to do things, but yeah, hopefully it can work. But either way, move on to San Francisco Shock, 2019 champions, 2020 champions. Historically, very, very good team, very good through lots of metas, right? But a lot of roster swaps going on recently, right? Last year they had, what was it, Super Choi Smurf, massive DPS lineup of, yeah, Ons, Nero, Tayo, Glister. I believe that was everyone. And then they had Violet, Twilight, FD God in that support line. And there's a lot of potential across the board, right? A lot of really, really good individual players, but it felt like a lot of things just went wrong, right? Taiwo didn't really hit his potential, right? Violet and Twilight were both really good, but Violet was playing a lot of weird roles. They didn't have a really good hit scan because Ons wasn't really doing well. He joined later on in the year though. He wasn't doing great. Yeah, they just kind of it seemed like a lot of things just went wrong for this team, right? Choi seemed to be performing a little bit worse than normal. I think Super was still performing at a pretty high level. There apparently was a lot of internal stuff going on, but lots and lots of changes happened in this offseason, including, loss of a majority of that roster, right? Where they only keep Super and Violet. Super and Violet are the last remaining members of this team, and the addition of Proper, Kilo, Sam, and Finn, right? Coaching staff stays relatively the same. I believe they dropped Zenith, yes, and 9K joined, right? He joined pretty recently. Yes. So, a little bit of a coaching staff swap, pretty big roster swap, and now we're with this. So, talking about strengths, first and foremost, I think Super is a very, very good tank to have as your solo tank, right? He's known for his main tanks, best Ryan in the world, very, very good Winston, very, very good Orisa, pretty solid ball, right? And I think that's a very good baseline to have. I think alongside that, he's a very, very good IGL, and he seems like a pretty smart person, right? He's been on a team for so long, he's been playing pro for a lot of time, and I feel like he's in a good spot to be able to pick up other tanks, right? And be able to pick up a Diva, pick up a Zarya, pick up a Sig, right? He's played Sig in the league before. That wasn't great, but you know, I feel like he can pick those up and play them at a solid level. But if they're in a main tank meta and they're playing like Ryan or they're playing Winston, they're going to be set, right? They're going to be great. They're playing Orisa. Um, they've got that covered. And I mean, it's a little bit questionable on some of those other picks, but still, having Super there is a very, very good level to start with, right? Also, Violet. Violet didn't have his best year last year, especially when it came to questions of discipline. And like he was making a lot of very dumb mistakes, like jumping on his BAP in rotations, right, and getting picked off early. He's doing a lot of dumb shit. He was getting picked off for it, and kind of that lack of discipline was killing him. But mechanically, he's still one of the greatest players of all time. He still is. He's still insanely talented, right? He's got a very noticeable playmaking kind of tendency. He makes things happen, and that's something you can't really force someone to do, right? You can't really you can't make that, you know. It's something that players have naturally, and um, Violet is kind of the epitome of going and making things happen and doing stuff on his own, and that is an indispensable tool for this team, right? I'm super excited to see him again. I'm glad he's coming back. Hopefully, he can kind of return to his old form, but his level of consistency is always going, not consistency, but his highest of highs, right? And the kind of playmaking star power that he can bring to the table, it cannot be understated, right? It's Violet. You know what I mean? He's just he's one of the greats, man. Arguably the greatest player of all time. It's insane, right? And then another super exciting and talented aspect of this roster is Proper. Um, if you've been on Twitter in the past 6 months or watched any Korean contenders, you'll know about Proper, right? Proper is arguably the most hyped up rookie prospect of this offseason, just from how good he was at Tracer, right? He was an insanely talented Tracer, right? Coming into the league, he's probably top five, right? Probably top five, top six. Um, I don't. Flexibility is a little bit of a question. I think he's got a very, very solid echo. Um, I don't know much about his other flex DPS, but his Tracer and his Echo will provide you with such a high level of play that I think Shock really got a steal, right? Um, they lost Striker, sure. Striker's a massive loss, greatest Tracer of all time probably, but having someone as high potential and talented as Proper coming in to replace that, you can't really ask for any better, right? And then he's coming in to get molded, right? Hopefully Krusty can make more out of him and make him into what Striker was, right? I'm super excited for that. I think Proper's insane. you know, phew, Jesus Christ, just that addition. Like, imagine losing Striker and you're like, yeah, we'll just sign Proper. It's fine. We'll just have Proper. Like that's unfair, man. That's completely unfair. So, really good swap they made. So that's kind of the strengths. And then we look at some questions around this team. One question I have is their second DPS. So Proper, we talked about him. Great Tracer, great Echo as well. Um, but you look at Kilo first. Kilo was, I mean, I don't know the numbers. I don't know who played more between Kilo and Merritt, but between the two of them, I'm personally more excited about Merritt. I think Merritt's probably the better player mechanically, and I'm more excited to see him in the league. But that doesn't mean Kilo's bad. It's just I don't think that Kilo was the better long range hit scan on O2 Blast, if that makes sense. I believe Kilo is probably a little bit more flexible from what I remember. Um, do not quote me on that because I can't say that. I don't really. So I watched a good bit of O2 Blast, especially towards the end of their contenders when they were playing a lot more ball comps. So I saw both Merritt and Kilo play a lot of Ash and a lot of Cass, but it's not something that I can really speak too much on. But I do think Merritt's probably more exciting to me. And if you're looking at the Shock as a championship contender team, it's going to be this is kind of something I always go back to, but do you compare Kilo to someone like Lip, someone like Ons at his best, right? People at that super high level of hit scan, where does Kilo fit into that? Hopefully, Kilo can kind of get adjusted to the league quickly, but still, I think that level of hit scan, like, does he compete with people like Kai? No, not yet, at least, right? I don't think he's better than Merritt. I think he's probably the worst of the two long range hit scans coming from O2 Blast, but oh, you're good. No rush. But yeah, I'm just kind of droning on a little bit. But I just Kilo's a bit of a question mark to me. Another question mark is Sam. Um, Sam came from Redbirds most recently, obviously. But um, let me look at the other teams because I can't remember every team. Redbirds, and then was Dark Mode before. Was it AT then Dark Mode? Really? Oh, AT was a long, long fucking time ago. Jesus Christ. But yeah, so he was on a lot of very, very high performing teams in NA contenders, and a lot of people are super high on him. A lot of people don't like him for this, that, whatever reason. I think he is a solid player, right? Pretty good echo, um, and mechanically is a pretty solid flex DPS. But it's gonna be the same question as Kilo. I keep bringing it back to this. Where does Sam line up to Kevster? Where does Sam line up to people like, you know, looks like I think Kevster first and foremost. And then you look at um, Pelican, right? You look at Dante. You look at like Nero. Like, where is he in those people? I don't think he's in that top tier of flex DPS. And we're at a point in the league where you have to be extremely, extremely top tier to compete, to be be a championship winning team. You look at Shanghai. Shanghai is S tier at the worst A tier players in every single role, right? You look at um, what's it called? You look at Atlanta. Atlanta and the comps they played had A or S tier players in every single role. Dallas, same thing. And you look at this team, if you're competing for the Overwatch League and you're competing to win the whole thing, does this team do that for you? Like Sam and Kilo, that provides, I don't know if that provides what I need to supplement Proper's star potential on Tracer, right? I think Tracer's going to be played a lot. Who plays Sombra between these two? I don't know. Again, we don't know what comps are going to be played. We don't know. But there's a lot of questions of whether those two can perform to the levels of the highest, like the highest, you know, potential or the highest skill, the highly skilled flex CPS that are across the league, right? It's a hard question to answer. We don't know yet, but I personally don't think they're the best second DPS in the league, but I can be proven wrong. I always can be. So, last question is, or last question mark is really in that support line. We talked about Violet. Violet's a very, very talented and he's legendary flex support. Finn's a little bit of a question. I like Finn. I watched Finn on O2 Blast. He's a very good Zen, specifically from what I remember. Um, Mechanically talented and can make plays, but he's pretty consistent overall. He's a pretty consistent player. Um, I'm just wondering if he can fill that kind of second support role in every meta. So you're going to have Violet on the most important role. You're going to have him on his BAP. You're going to have him on his Zen. You're going to have him probably not on Ana, if we're going to be honest. But who plays the Brig? Who's going to be playing their Lucio? Who's going to be playing their Mercy? Probably Finn for the most part. Just looking at what you have, you're going to put Violet on his best role. I don't know. It's hard. There's a lot of questions with this team when it comes to flexibility, like who's going to play Sombra, who's going to play Brig, who's going to play these super important roles. I don't know. It's There's a lot to ask. There's a lot to ask about the Shock, right? You can always have faith in Krusty, right? Have faith in him. He's done a lot of really good work in the past. He's also got 9K back, so there's that benefit. But like as much as you want to put faith in them, they have a super good tank, obviously, to hold down the fort. They got Violet, who's always going to be there to make plays. Proper, insanely talented, but the rest of that roster does concern me a little bit, right? Okay. But I mean, they've shown that if they can come together and Super can kind of lead this team like he always has, and they can all compete at the potential they have, I could see them pushing at the top. Maybe not. I don't see this team being the best in the league, but I can see them pushing pretty high, right? Last but not least is Vancouver Titans. So, if you look at Vancouver last year, abysmal, really, really bad, right? Did not really do well. Only worse than they were only better than the Valiant, right? And they were kind of around the same area as London, right? Really didn't do well. Not the best. But here they are, big changes in their roster, almost completely changed the roster, I believe, right? Yeah, I don't think anyone stayed. Completely new, wiped clean roster. Staff stayed the same, and new roster of Aspire, Shockwave with Psycho, and then False as the solo tank, and Masa, Aztec, Skyrip as support line. So pretty interesting sign up. I believe it's one of the only. Is it the only team that has no people of the same nationality? Let me look at London real quick. I think London maybe. Oh, London has two British people, but Vancouver is completely mixed, and then Florida has two Koreans. So yeah, I think Vancouver might be the only fully international team, which is super cool actually. Um, but so looking at Vancouver, look at strengths. I think one of the biggest strengths of this team is this DPS line. Um, Aspire is a top tier long range hit scan, right? Especially on Widow. His Widow was one of the best in the league and really kind of pulled Toronto out of a lot of rough spots. And he really did provide a lot of impetus to that team and kind of galvanize them and push them forward. He only signed for a little bit. He ended up getting dropped, I believe, and now is getting picked up by Vancouver. I'm super excited to see him back in the league. I think he deserves a spot at least. I think he definitely deserves to be there just on his talent. And I'm not sure about his trace or anything like that, but his long range hit scan definitely performs. Um, Super happy to see him back in the league after his performance in Toronto. And then also you look at Shockwave. I think Shockwave is a very good kind of middle ground flex DPS, right? Your tracer plus hit your tracer plus is kind of what I'm thinking of it as, right? He'll probably play your tracer. He'll play a lot of your long range hit scans. It'll probably be a Spire on like your Widow Ash. I think Shockwave probably plays like I think Shockwave might lean into that tracer. That's my thought. We'll see. I don't really know. Um, but those two together provides a very, very good hit scan duo that you can cover pretty much any duo you want, right? Any two you want. Then they had Psycho. I think Psycho is fine. He wasn't my favorite player in contenders. I think he did very, very well on Falcons, right? Um, Falcons obviously did fantastic, so he's got a lot of pedigree. But we've seen in kind of European contenders that European contenders isn't always the best translation for, best players, but he was on one of the best teams for a year, right? I think he does have talent, especially I remember his Echo being pretty strong. Um, oh yeah, he had to play. I forgot that EU had the whole Doomfist time where Dana just made everyone play Doom, and they did it, and it was great. It was hilarious. But yeah, he's a pretty good player. In all honesty, I don't think it's gonna be the same question as a lot of the other flex DPS. Like, okay, where does he compete with? Like, I think he's like around the same level as Sam. I think he's probably a little better, but still, that's a pretty solid core to have as your DPS. Um, I think what's it called? Let me look at my notes real quick. Another strength I kind of lean into is I think they have some really good pocket picks when it comes to their support line. Masa's a very strong Lucio. Um, I've talked enough about Masa across a few videos. He lives rent free in my head apparently, but Masa's a very strong Lucio, right? Um, so he comes in from Atlanta. He provides a veteran presence, so that's super impactful and super important for this team. Kind of that consistency, right? You also bring in Aztac, who was, you know, Toronto wasn't the greatest team, but he had a pretty good history playing on WGS Phoenix, and hopefully he can kind of bring it back to that, you know, high potential level, right? And that level that you'd assume that you'd be getting from like a player that's winning Korean contenders, right? From that level. Obviously, he wasn't performing at that kind of level. Toronto was a little bit of a mess in some places, but you know, having that, at least a pretty like a mid tier to mid low tier flex support does provide you with a certain level of performance, right? You look at Skyripa, I think very highly of Skyripa actually. Um, Even though he was on the worst version of Hurricane, I say worse because they weren't winning everything, right? But they were performing top three, top four, maybe top two, right? They were kind of in that range. Um, and he performed pretty well. I think very highly of him, especially as Baptiste. I think was it? No, no, no. Who am I thinking of? No. Well, I think Skyripper, from what I saw, was a pretty good player, even despite his team not doing too well, right? When you look at this old Hurricane roster, this roster that was playing, I believe that they had some other weak spots. I think Helv was kind of on his way out when it comes to playing. I don't think Hybrid was very good. I don't think you kids was great for this team, right? But they had a lot of very talented players, right? Like Admiral, who moved on to the London Spitfire, right? I think that backline was probably the best part of that team, other than like, when Shax and Sparker came down and played. But I think that was a pretty solid spot, and I think him and Aztec does provide a some interplay where one of them could focus on specific heroes, one could focus on others. Like Aztec can probably focus on like Zen Ana or like Zen, and Skyripa focuses on Ana Bap or whatever, right? I think that that's a pretty good base to have when it comes to coverage. Also, I'm sure one of them can learn Brig because I mean I've said it before. I don't think Moss is the greatest Brig in the world. I think he's a little bit of a liability, and maybe Skyripa or Aztec can pick that up. So then they'll have a flex support who fits kind of that skewed role and can play, Zen plus Brig, right? And fill that kind of niche role so they'll be able to cover everything. I think Moss can play your Lucy and your Mercy, and there's a pretty good base there. And then we look at False. I think False is a very talented off tank, specifically Diva and Sig. I think his Sig is very, very good. Diva's solid. I'm not sure about his Zarya. I don't know much about it. I'm gonna be honest, but he was on AT for a long time, um, and was kind of that. He was always on the same. He was always performing at that level with Reiner, right? Providing this very, very solid base for what was this an extremely talented backline and DPS line, right? And he was always performing at that, right? He was never a liability for that team, and that kind of shows that a team that was performing at that level, I have to think highly of False, right? Mm, Sorry, I think very highly of him. I think he's a very talented player. But kind of questions around him is whether he can play every tank. I think his Diva and Sigma will be great. Um, really, really high level player. But can he play your Ryan? Can he play your Winston? Can he play your Wrecking Ball? I don't know, man. Those are questionable. Those are I don't know. But at least you'll get something out of your Diva and your Sig. I think he does provide a certain level of performance that is extremely exciting, right? But with him and with the rest of this team, I my biggest concern is okay, you've got a really good base across the board, right? Some pretty good pieces. One, can you come together as a core and like overcome your kind of weaknesses and shortcomings and star power? And two, where's that star power coming from, right? Who's gonna carry this team? Like who's gonna be the the linchpin, the spearhead for this team? Is it gonna be Aspire? Is it gonna be Shockwave? Right? Like who are they gonna play around? Who's gonna be the most impactful player on this team? I don't really know. I'd assume it's gonna be Aspire or Shockwave. I think those are probably the two best players on this team. But compare those two with, you know, you've got Proper on Tracer, right? You've got Merit, you've got Dante, you've got Pelican, you've got Kai, right? If that's your spearhead and you're just going to get shut down by one of these extremely high talent players across the league, where does your plan go from there? I don't know. It's a really, really hard situation to be in for Vancouver because there's so many good teams in the league. But I will say they've done a good job improving upon what they had, right? Their last roster was awful compared to what it is now, right? A lot of players that didn't seem like they belonged at all. They were always falling behind. But now they've got a really solid base to work from, and then from here they can decide what pieces work, what pieces don't, and build. They can work further and kind of work towards becoming a middle level team, right? Moving up from the bottom. You're not going to expect a league. You're not going to expect the league from this team, right? But at least you can expect some wins. They can upset some people. I think they've got some potential. I'm excited to see them. Uh, a lot of people are really down on them, but I don't want to be so doomer, right? Um, I think there's a lot to look forward to with this team. I wouldn't expect the league. I wouldn't expect the world, but you know, I I don't want to come in and be like, yeah, Vancouver's gonna fucking suck. Of course they are. Because I mean, they're competing with a lot of really good teams, but you know, really solid pieces across the board will get you something, and I don't think they're gonna be the worst team in the league, right? I don't think that, but I mean, I keep saying that like everything's a but, everything's a but. There's just so many good teams around the league that you wonder if they can compete. I mean, there's been questions about their staff the whole time, but that's not something I'm comfortable commenting on because I don't know. I don't work with them. You never know. Mm, right. But yeah, so that's that. And now, so I need to rank these teams in this division. I'll probably start from the bottom and go up because that'll be the easiest way to do this. But Atlantic North and Atlantic South have both been ranked already. That's what I have listed. Those are already in order. Now, I haven't decided on a lot of these. So first, I think let's get the easiest one out of the way. I think the LA Valiant has to be last for the pure reason of I just don't think their DPS are that great. I think their supports are only solid, you know. I think Lynx is a pretty good base. I'm not too sure about how Coldus is going to do. And they don't have a tank. They just don't have a tank. They don't have a tank player. Who's going to I don't know. I just don't know. I literally don't know who's on that team. So I just can't judge them. There's nothing I can say. Um, that's just hard. Like I love No Hill. I'm sure he's gonna do great with whatever tank they have. They have a tank, I hope. But yeah, that's hard. Um, fourth is already in place, the Vancouver Titans. So as I talked about, I like a lot of the Vancouver players. I think there's a lot of potential there, especially with like their DPS line. I think their DPS line is very talented individuals. I think they have a really solid base across the board when it comes to their supports. And I think False is really good off tank. But you're comparing this team with some of the best teams in the world, right? I think this division is extremely competitive, right? You look at this top three, they're so good. I just don't see them competing with a team like that. You look at that backline, like I don't see Aztac and Skyripa competing with a backline like Finn and Violet, right? Or I don't see False competing with Super. And then you got like Proper, like who matches that Tracer, right? It's just a really, really hard ask for me to say Vancouver is going to be better than any of those three teams. Those three teams are so good that I feel like Vancouver being pretty good just isn't enough to push past that, right? So that's my kind of biggest concern. Number three between these teams is the LA Gladiators. So I love a lot of these players, right? Mm, fuck, this is so hard. Okay, so in my head, I was like, yes, the Glads. I have to put the Glads. I have to put the Glads. But it's so hard, man. So fucking hard, especially with that support line with those tanks. Oh, it's just that second DPS is so concerning to me. Hmm. All right. I think. Fuck, dude, this is hard. I think what I have to do is I'm going to swap it up. I had to put the San Francisco Shock at third, um, purely for the fact that they don't have as deep or as flexible of a roster as the Gladiators, right? I love Super. I think Super's a great main tank. I think he's better main tank than Reiner, right? But can he provide the flexibility across? Well, he's better at Ryan. He's probably better at Winston to a degree. He's definitely better at Orisa, right? But he's not a better ball player, right? Not a better might not be a better hog. Reiner's a very good hog. Um, but they don't have that coverage on off tank, right? You look at DPS. I think Proper's insane. I think Proper's so good, right? But I think Kevster is probably more flexible. Maybe not as good of a tracer, but he definitely matches him on a lot of other heroes, right? And then they also have, and then like Proper does match up to Kevster on tracer, but I don't know about outside of that. Probably Echo too, but doesn't provide that flexibility. Kilo and Sam, I are kind of in the same boat as Patty Fan and Ons, right? I feel like there's a bit of a higher floor for Patty Fannin. There's a bit of a higher floor for Kilo and Sam because they've just been in the game more recently. But the peak for Ons and Patty Fan is so high, right? So it's hard. So like I'm kind of doing these two teams at the same time, right? But that second DPS spot for the Shock feels like it's just not going to hit like its peaks are so much harder to judge, right? Or I feel like they can't peak as high as Gladiator's peak can. And then backline, I just think Glads has the best backline in the league, right? Hands down. I just think their backline and flexibility in their backline is it's unmatched across the entire league. So yeah, I have to put Shock below, even though they have Violet, even though they have Super, right? And Proper. I just think Glad's flexibility across the board and how much talent they have across the board puts them above the Shock. And then first, kind of a given, is the Dallas Fuel. Dallas were top three in the league, maybe top two throughout the entire year, and they only got stronger. Only got stronger. Added more flexibility in DPS and added probably an upgraded main support, right? I just think they got better. So I think that's what I like. I'm super high on the Glads. I just don't think they're going to be Dallas level. I think Dallas does have a leg up over every team in this division, but yeah, that's kind of how I have it. Pacific West, I have Dallas Fuel, Gladiators, Shock, Vancouver Titans, Valiant, right? Obviously, there's a lot of things I can't know. I can't know about coaching staff and how those are working or how teams are working on the inside right now. It's just what I'm hedging my bets on is on the Glad's backline being as good as I think they are, and on one of their DPS hitting, right? But their tanks are going to be great. They have a lot more flexibility across the board. They just don't have they just don't have that tracer, right? That Proper has, right? But they have Shu who can match up to Violet on a lot of days, right? Maybe not every day, but a lot of days. Yeah. So I have Dallas Fuel first, Gladiators second, Shock third, Vancouver Titans fourth, Valiant fifth, right? I would like to say that there is a very, very distinct tier break between Shock and Titans. I think Shock is significantly better than these Titans are, but that top three, especially that top two and three, is like number two, number three are extremely close. That's so hard to judge, man. That's such a difficult decision to make that I'm so excited to see them both play. Like I want them to play so bad. But yeah, that's how I judge it.